Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, good morning, actually. As Sharon indicated, my name is Cynthia Bell. I work for the Literacy Assistance Center. We are a professional development agency based out of New York City. My colleague Kate has been kind enough to help me make this webinar more interactive and participatory. So she will be engaging with you all via Q&A. I also stop at certain points to address specific questions so that it feels more like a conversation and rather less than a lecture for that matter. So I am going to begin screen sharing with you all so we can, you all can see the PowerPoint that I have open. And this is part one of a training that I do called Shifting from Mathematical Work to Meaningful Tasks. Okay, so it is sponsored by Burlington English. I'm trying to advance the PowerPoint here. There we go. Okay, so just have three objectives today. We're going to actually cover one tool today. I'd like to discuss about three tools for how to make this shift, and we're going to cover one of those tools today, and we will be discussing the other tools in the future. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So just slight objectives today. One, to build the understanding of the effects of meaningful tasks. Since if we're going to discuss how to shift to meaningful tasks, we want to make sure that we are all on the same page as far as the effects. The other, how to understand the levels of cognitive demand as they relate to depth of knowledge. And more specifically, discuss the 8 standard mathematical practices. So let's begin with what is a meaningful task? So I have already provided the answer for that. It's a mathematical task that is a problem or set of problems that focuses students' attention, particular mathematical ideas, and/or provides an opportunity to develop or use those in a mathematical habit of mind. So what that really means is that we want to engage students with problems or situations that encourage them to think and develop habits of mind such as perseverance and problem solving and logical reasoning. They also they're engaging and they're relatable, and they can maintain student interest. And that is a powerful reason right there to have a meaningful task. Why are they important? Let's start with the last one that we just talked about. They lead to prolonged retention. For those of us who are currently actively teaching or very active in the field, we know that retention is an issue that we deal with constantly as far as getting students to continuously attend, to have sustained attendance. And meaningful task is one way research shows to actually keep students in the seat. If you think about it, it has to do with sometimes literally the student is just wondering what the teacher is going to do next. We have students sometimes that are really involved with work life and situations like that, and it's okay if they know that they're only going to come to class and get a worksheet. They know that they can always just get that worksheet from a colleague, from a friend, or from another teacher. But if they're going to be engaged in meaningful tasks, sometimes they come to class just to find out what you're going to do because they can't just get that worksheet. They've missed this entire experience, this reasoning, this logical connection, this thinking, engaging with and cooperative learning. So it actually does lead to prolonged retention. Another reason that we'd want to have meaningful tasks is because they help us as teachers to shift our instruction from how to get an answer to understanding mathematics. And this is powerful when it comes to our practice as instructors. Most numeracy instruction is delivered the way that we were taught, which was very procedurally based and focused really solely on how to get an answer. But when you engage students with meaningful tasks, that shift stops from how to get an answer to understanding what you're doing, the connections that are making, the concepts that are being engaged, the reasoning skills that are there. And that actually leads to what we like to call numeracy, which is a very, very employable asset for adults to have. So that is a shift in stepping away from worksheets, it actually helps us as educators to make a shift in our instruction from focusing on this is how you get the answer, these are the steps to get the answer, please do these steps and you will get the answer. And it will allow us to think about how can we help our students understand mathematics and not just an answer. So remember, if you do have questions about any of the things I'm talking about, please feel free to post them in the Q&A session. And I am going to stop after about 3 or 4 slides to try and address any questions that Kate shares with me that you all are sending her way and that you'd like for me to answer. Okay, so since we talked about the reasons for meaningful tasks and what they are, I also want to talk with you all a moment about dominant cultural beliefs. I work with a lot of teachers. Right now, I'm currently a math coach, and I spend time with teachers one-on-one, and we discuss some of the challenges that they have when it comes to teaching mathematics. Some teachers are really interested in meaningful tasks, and they really want to give their students a higher level of thinking. But some of us, including myself, we have these beliefs that are somewhat ingrained in us, and it's difficult for us to move past them. So I did want to address that for a minute and allow everyone a chance to think about this. This is a quote that dominant cultural beliefs about the teaching and learning of mathematics continue to be obstacles. And they're obstacles to effective teaching and learning, right? And so there are a lot of cultural beliefs, particularly in America, as to how mathematics should be taught and how mathematics should be learned. So I'm actually going to share that document with you all. Hopefully this will work seamlessly for me to share that document with you all, for you all to look at it. So what I'm going to ask for you to do is take about 3 minutes to read through this document. So I'm going to pause my sharing for a minute to try and do this, to share this document with you all. Didn't mean to stop the sharing. Sorry about that. Okay, so I would like for you all to read the document. And if you notice here in this document, we have a column on our left called unproductive beliefs and a column on the right for productive beliefs. I'm going to give everyone about 3 to 4 minutes to read through this. And I'm going to ask you to reflect yourself as a practitioner, as an administrator, and really just read through it and identify which ones resonate with you. Because we all have some ingrained beliefs because we've gone through education system or we've been teaching for so many years, and sometimes these beliefs are there. Not all beliefs are bad and not all beliefs are good. That's why it's labeled as unproductive and productive beliefs. Can everyone see that? I hope everyone can see that. Okay, so you definitely will get this document. I have provided a couple ways for you to have access to this document. This presentation and the document that I just asked you to read over will be available on the COABE resource website. I also am going to share it with you via a QR code. So those of you who happen to have a mobile device ready in front of you, you can actually pick up your mobile device now and scan this QR code over here in the corner if you would like to have access to that document. That document this QR code will give you access to that document currently if you don't want to wait for it to be uploaded. I think this is a very powerful tool. It is a source from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They issued a publication about 2 years ago called Principles in Action, and it's all about learning and teaching mathematics, and it's about best practices for teaching mathematics. And it does begin with this dominant cultural beliefs section. So we as instructors need to be reflective ourselves so that we can move on to these shifts from these things, from the unproductive beliefs such as worksheets and procedural instruction. So I think it's a very valuable tool to use to help students and teachers to reflect. I also listed it here in the PowerPoint. So if you don't have access to the document somehow, some way you don't get access to it, but you do have the access to the PowerPoint, I've also listed that table here on the PowerPoint as well. So what I actually would like to do, because I do want this to be a little bit productive, participatory, I would like for, if you want to share, if there are any beliefs that resonate with you on the unproductive side or the productive side, please feel free to type them in to the chat box so that we can see them, right? We're not alone. Most of us share these beliefs. Whenever I do this with teachers in person, there's always like a couple that kind of group together where we see that there are a lot of us in the room that share this one particular belief for the unproductive or one particular belief for the productive. So if you want to share that with us, my colleague here, Kate, is going to monitor that and then give me back those results and let us see like which ones are the ones that a lot of the people are resonating with. To be completely transparent, the one that resonates with me the most on the unproductive side is the role of the teacher is to tell students exactly what definitions, formulas, and rules they should know and demonstrate how to use this information to solve mathematics problems. That's not to say that that is wrong. It's just, it's not a productive belief. And unfortunately, it's a belief that I have because it was the way that I was taught. It was the way that I initially began teaching mathematics at the beginning of my career before I started to develop a little bit more into how students and adults really do learn. Likewise, on the productive belief side, I like the belief that the role of the student is to be actively involved in making sense of mathematics tasks by using varied strategies and representations, justifying solutions, making connections, prior knowledge. All of that excites me. I'm like, yes, that's what adults should do because adults have prior knowledge. They have intuitive knowledge. I want them to justify. I want them to reason. That is a productive belief about teaching and learning mathematics. So I have some unproductive beliefs and some productive beliefs, as many people do, or you have had in the past. So feel free to share any of those with us so that we can kind of communicate a little bit that way and see which ones, yeah, that one did resonate with me on the unproductive or the productive side. So I am going to leave it up for another 30 seconds because I know that some people might actually be trying to type it in, and then if I change the slide, they were in the middle of their sentence. So I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. If you were not able to scan the QR code and actually have the document in front of you, no, it was on the other slide, the QR code. So, but you can look at this one currently and type away. Let us know what you think.
Mostly about not having mastered basic skills.
Okay.
And either students wanting to skip ahead to more advanced skills, or students feeling that they need to master those basic skills before they themselves can move on.
Okay, so we're getting a lot of questions about basic skills and what students need to have. And what I will say to answer that question is that this shift of best practices and the shift of practicing with meaningful tasks can be applied no matter what the content level is. Moving on to meaningful tasks will help students who need basic skills to master them effectively so that they can move on to higher level content. It does not need to be such that I need to know my times tables before you can give me a task that will allow me to reason. Meaningful tasks, especially high quality meaningful tasks, have multiple entry pathways. And what that means is that if you give especially a diversified classroom with differentiated learning levels, if you give them a great task, a meaningful task, it should be accessible from any level. So you might give me a task and I might approach it with algebra because I'm really good with algebraic reasoning, but that same task, another student might approach it using mathematical tiles or any other manipulative. Great, meaningful tasks have multiple entry points, and they are accessible at various levels. And I'm going to demonstrate that for you when we actually do engage in a task for you all. But I wanted to make sure that we address this first, because it really does have to do with us as teachers first. If we're going to make this shift from mathematics worksheets to meaningful tasks, we need to be a little reflective of things that we believe. And some people have these beliefs where we feel like students must have certain rote things memorized, and the way to do that is with the worksheet. I'm not advocating for people to not have things memorized. What I'm advocating for is to help people to memorize these things by engaging them in meaningful tasks so that they will become ingrained in them. Okay, so I'm going to move on to talk a little bit more about implementing tasks that promote reasoning, since that's what we've been talking about, especially when it comes to adults. We want to implement tasks that promote learning and reasoning. And the research shows, because I wanted you all to understand that this is not just my opinion, that there has been a lot of research around this, that these tasks tend to be more present in the successful classrooms. And the classrooms that are routine and procedural in nature have students that are not as successful. So there's actually research that shows that moving to meaningful tasks that encourage logical reasoning and problem solving helps students to be more successful, i.e. mastering those basic skills. And then lastly, when it comes to those meaningful tasks, you want to also have tasks that range in cognitive demand. And that's actually going to be one of the other tools that we discuss in a forthcoming webinar. But since we're on the topic of introducing the meaningful tasks, I did want to include this thought. You want to have a range of cognitive demand, and that has to do with accessibility. So you don't want to just present a task that is all high level cognitive demand and there is not a range. And what I mean by cognitive demand, once again, I'm not talking about content, I'm talking about cognitive complexity. You can have high cognitive complexity on basic addition, on basic multiplication, on basic subtraction. Cognitive complexity, the best way that I like to describe it is how much brain power did it take? It doesn't have to do with the content, it has to do with how much brain power did it take for someone to engage and reason and problem solve. Okay, so now let's talk about the tool. Talking about the first tool for how to make this shift, because I know that's what a lot of people want to see. They want to see this actual worksheets and how you can do the things that we were just talking about. Maybe you're interested in moving away from an unproductive belief, or you're really engaged with meaningful tasks and you just like to deepen your understanding, your way of how to take worksheets that you've previously had in lessons and how to modify them. So one of the ways that you can do that is to use the standard practices of the College and Career Readiness Standards. And once again, I'm citing the NCTM's source, Principles to Actions. It's a great book. And I love this quote. It basically summarizes the 8 standard practices. Oh no. I am sorry about that. I had my screen sharing paused. There we go. It basically summarizes the 8 standard practices here. Effective teaching of mathematics engages students in solving. I don't understand why it's not staying here. Let's try that again. I apologize. I clicked on the PowerPoint and then it says my screen sharing is paused. Let's try that again, one more time. Okay. I'm going to try and close this Word document and see if that helps here. I apologize, everyone. We were there, and now it's not there anymore. Okay, let's go out. Hello. I'm going to go back into the PowerPoint, and that should fix the problem. Can everyone see the PowerPoint now? Yeah. There we go. Okay. So we have the 8 standard practices from the College and Career Readiness Standards, and not to go too deep into the standards, what I like to do is look at them by their experiences. And those standards are broken down into 4 experiences. So basically there are 8 standard practices, and they couple into these 4 experiences. So each experience is coupled with 2 practices. And I will show you those practices on the next slide. But first, I wanted to look at it generically with the experiences. Habits of mind, reasoning, explaining, modeling using tools, and seeing structure and generalizing. So when I'm thinking about shifting from worksheets, I'm thinking about these experiences that I want my students to have, particularly the first 2, habits of mind and reasoning, explaining. So here is a document that I love to share with teachers because most teachers are teaching more than just math. And it's a really great way looking at the 8 standard practices for mathematics, as you can see here in the pink column, and how they connect with the standard practices for science, and how they connect with the basic understanding of learning English language arts. So we're going to talk about these 8 here because this was the tool that we're going to discuss today for how to make the shift. And if you can recall from the slide before, I said they're broken into 4 experiences. The first experience was habit of mind. And this standard here makes sense of problems and persevere in solving them, connects with attend to precision. And these 2 standards are under the experience of habit of mind. Then the next experience was reasoning and explaining. And the standard here, reason abstractly and quantitatively, construct viable arguments, critique the reasoning of others. These 2 connect with reasoning and explaining. These 4 really are the bread and meat of my instruction when I'm working with teachers and helping them to make this shift. You want students to do these things. So when you're thinking about these practices, they're about how students should be learning and engaging with mathematical content. It does not have anything to do with the content they're learning or the level of the content, whether they're on a level 1 or a level 9 or a level 4 or a level 8. Students should be engaging with these practices when it comes to learning mathematics. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to look on the College and Career Readiness Standards, or they are from the Common Core as well, these 8 standard practices. This will also be one of the documents that you will have when you get the presentation. I really encourage you to take a look at this because a lot of these, especially between the math and the science, they connect. And that's a great way to begin with interdisciplinary instruction between math and science. So we're going to talk about how to make this shift, okay? So here's an actual worksheet that I used to use in my algebra class. I taught algebra at a school here in the Bronx in New York City, as well as lower level math class. And my algebra class was for students who were about to take their HSC equivalency test, or they had already taken it and passed it and were about to move on to college. And so I was teaching my unit on linear equations, as a number of us has probably started to do with the new assessments that are involved. And this was a worksheet. It was a standard worksheet that I would do after I provided my instruction on how to solve linear equations. And the linear equation instruction pretty much went like, I'm sure it is with a lot of people, you combine like terms. The goal is to isolate the variable. What you do to one side, you do to the other. Inverse operations, etc. But what I realized was when I would give the students this exact worksheet for homework, they would come back and they would always say, I got stuck at this problem. And the answer was always the same. And I would say, well, what is it that you did? Tell me what you did. And they said, I tried to follow the steps and I did what you did to one side, you do the other, I combine like terms, but my variable disappeared. And what I realized was there was a lack of actual understanding of what linear equations are. And that helped me to begin to think about the standard practices. I said my problem is the students are not reasoning abstractly and quantitatively with these equations. They are just reproducing steps that I gave them. So I engaged in the standard practice number 2 of reason abstractly and quantitatively, and the standard practice number 3 of constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. So I changed this worksheet based on that practice, constructing viable arguments, critiquing the reasoning of others, into this activity. This activity is called classifying statements. So if you notice, this exact equation was on that worksheet. It was no longer a worksheet that I gave my students. It was now a task that took 2 days to do. I would take those equations, I would put them in pairs, and I would ask them to decide if that linear equation was a statement that was always true, sometimes true, or never true. In doing that, when starting that discussion, we talked about the concept of an equation. It is actually a mathematical statement. It's not just something that you solve. It is a sentence. It says that p minus 1 is the same as 5p plus 3p minus 8. And just like in literacy, people say things, but that doesn't always make them true. Or sometimes they're true, or all the time they're true. So I put them together in partners, and with this activity, what they did was they got the equation and they had to discuss and construct viable arguments and figure out if the statement was always true, sometimes true, or never true. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to allow you to engage with this for a minute. We're going to do 2 of them so you can get a feel for how this activity works. Now, however you choose to do that, that's totally up to you. I'm going to give you a minute. If you'd like to type your answer in the chat box or the Q&A box, you can do so. Or if you want to just assess yourself at home or wherever you are, that's also fine. But if you want to share it with us, we'll see if everybody agrees. All right, so hopefully, let's see, what did we come up with? Kate, do we have any answers in our Q&A or our chat?
We have a couple of sometimes, and we have a few nevers.
Okay, so thank you for answering. So the other part of this task that they would do, which is why I put them together with partners, they engage in a discussion. You have to justify your answer. Remember that standard practice said, construct a viable argument and critique the reasoning of others. That is what I wanted the students to do, which is why I partnered them together. So if I'm working with a partner who says, this statement is sometimes true, they have to prove it. That is the other part of the activity. So once they determine which is the classification for this, they have to prove it. I say to my students, I never take anyone's word for anything. If you said it's sometimes true, you have to show me one that works and one that doesn't work. If it's always true, you have to show me at least 2 that proves that it always works. If it say it's never true, you have to give me 2 proofs that show that it doesn't work. So in this particular statement, this is actually sometimes true. And it's sometimes true, and this has to do with the concept of a linear equation. It is sometimes true because when you solve this equation, however you choose to solve it, you get p is equal to 1. That means that the only time that this statement is true is when p is equal to 1. So you have found one time when it is true. But then what if p was equal to 2? If p was equal to 2, would this equation be balanced? No. What if p was equal to -3? Would it be balanced? No. Actually, when you solve a linear equation and you isolate the variable, what you're doing is looking for the one time when this statement is true. And if you get that, you found out that that statement is sometimes true. So this is actually sometimes true. And the 2 proofs would be it works when p is equal to 1, and it doesn't work when p is equal to 17,479, whatever number you want, because you've only found the one time when it does work. We'll do one more. If you recall, this one was also on the worksheet. And remember I said this is the one where a lot of them would get stuck and they say, I was done with the worksheet. Think about this one now. Is this statement sometimes true, always true, or never true? And then don't forget your 2 numerical proofs. All right. So hopefully, Kate tells me that some people were typing in their answer as well. And I also see that you all are engaging in some really good constructing viable arguments, right? And critiquing the reasoning of others. But just like with my students, if you say that it's this, you have to prove why. You can't just say, no, it's always true. You have to explain why. So once again, with that last one, the concept of a linear equation, it is literally a mathematical statement. Just like as a expression is an incomplete statement, it's a fragment. That statement says that 4m minus 4 is the same as 4m. Is that ever true? Is there ever an instance in which 4m minus 4 will be the same as 4m? This one is actually never true. And you could actually reason your way through this without even having to isolate the variable or combine like terms. You could literally think about this. Well, I have 4m on one side and 4m on the other side. Those two values are the same. But if I take away 4 on the left side, how are you saying that that's the same as the 4m on the right side? If you can prove it, finding a value for m that would make them the same, because that's what the equal sign means, then you have a chance to prove that it's sometimes true. However, in this instance, this is a never true statement. And I would ask the students to provide their two proofs. So you could say, if m was 7, it's not true. And if m was 12, it's not true. You would actually plug those numbers into the variable and you would say that it's not true. So to wrap up how this task works, and yes, this classifying statements can work with any level of content. In fact, when I first started doing classifying statements as an activity, I was not doing it with high level math. The high level math, as I said, I was doing the equation worksheet with my students, and they were getting stuck on the lack of conceptual understanding. And I went back to my remembering. I remembered that I used to do classifying statements. I used to do it with my lowest level students. I would give them statements like A plus B is equal to B plus A. Meaning I wanted them to think about, does it matter if I switch the order when I'm adding two numbers? And they would justify whether that was sometimes, always, or never true. Or I would give them other statements like 3 divided by 5 is the same as 5 divided by 3. Is that sometimes true? Is it always true? Is it never true? Prove it. Either way, I wanted them to engage in the standard practice of constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. The experience I wanted them to gain was explaining and reasoning. If your reason makes sense, mathematically speaking, you're going to present it to the class. So that's how we would finish this activity. If you recall, I said that it would take 2 days. So I would give them the partner time. I would give them the appropriate time to go through each one of these statements and figure out if it was sometimes true, always true, never true. And I like to hear them argue with each other. And then you'd hear someone say, prove it. Nope, you got to prove it, right? And that's what you wanted to have happen. And then we would do a gallery walk, because I love gallery walks. Everyone would put their charts on the wall, and then we'd go through and people would decide if they agreed with everyone else's work. And the ones that we disagreed on, that's when we would have, as a class, we would argue as a class. Okay, so this one over here, everyone says that it's never true, but this group over here has it as sometimes true. They would have to present their argument for the class. Why? Because we're constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. So if I had a pair of students and they were the only ones in the room who said that the statement was sometimes true, I would let them go for it. I would encourage them to go for it. It's okay to stand alone as long as you have a justifiable, reasonable argument. Because maybe everyone else in the room is thinking incorrectly. They lack a conceptual understanding. And now they will get the chance to share that conceptual understanding. So the task now becomes something much richer and deeper than just this basic worksheet that I was sharing with them. So I will go back to the worksheet so that you can see what it looked like now. This was the worksheet. This was a take this home and solve each equation worksheet. And now it is a work with the partner, determine if it's sometimes true, always true, never true, gallery walk, assess everyone else's thinking, class discussion. I'm right, you're not right, here's why. Did you think about negative numbers? What about fractions? Did you try 0? People are now reasoning and explaining versus a worksheet in which they may have mastered a procedure, with a lack of conceptual understanding. A lot of students lack a conceptual understanding when it comes to equations. They remember what steps they're supposed to do to solve it. But has anybody really talked to them about what they are? Why you isolate the variable? What are you doing when you isolate the variable? When you isolate the variable, what you're doing is finding the one instance in which that statement is true. If it was a quadratic and you got 2, you found the 2 instances in which that statement is true. So it takes them beyond a procedural understanding to a conceptual understanding. And I wanted to also demonstrate for you again, because this whole part was about shifting from worksheets. This was another worksheet. This may look very familiar to a lot of people. This is from the old GED math book on that unit on slope, that unit that we hoped we had time to get to, right? And it was the same thing like every other worksheet. It tells you how to calculate the slope. It gives you the slope formula, and then it gives you 7 problems and tells you to calculate the slope, to solve each problem. Once again, a rote memorization worksheet, which does have its place sometimes, but if I wanted to change this to a meaningful task, I thought about the standard practices again. Standard practice number 2 of reason abstractly and quantitatively. I will go back there so that some people, so you can see it, because some are visual, like myself. Standard practice number 2 and standard practice number 7. Look for and make use of structure. I used to avoid standard practice number 7 and 8. And then I realized that that one was actually, should be one of my best friends, because there's structure everywhere and adults are really good at finding structure. So I then took that worksheet and modified it using those 2 standard practices, and I turned it into a task. And the task looks something like this. I took this question here, number 1, and I asked them to begin to think. I didn't say anything about how it was a slope. I didn't go into the slope formula. I tapped into their prior knowledge and their intuitive knowledge. And I just asked them to think about making a T-chart. I will give this disclaimer that by the time we got to this point, my students had already engaged in T-tables repeatedly. So at this point, this was not something that was new for them. They immediately knew what it was because we had been doing proportion tables throughout the semester. I'll talk about that a little bit more in our instructional shifts tool. So the task was for them to create a proportion T-table that included these 2 points. That in itself caused reasoning, because when you put those 2 points there, you have to immediately begin to look for a pattern so that you can see how they fit on the chart. And then the next task that I asked them to do was identify the rate of change between those numbers, which once again was something that they had already been discussing. We had been discussing these things because I spent weeks with them talking about ratios and rates. They were able to calculate the rate of change. I did not give the slope formula again. I let them think about, well, how would I find the change? I saw that I had 3 here, and I saw that I had 5 here, and I saw that I had 7 here. So there's a difference of 2. And then on the other side, I saw I had 2, I saw I had 8, I saw I had 14. There's a difference of 6. Then I gave them the slope formula, and I told them to use the slope formula now and calculate the slope of those 2 lines. And when they did, they'd get 3 to 1 or 6 to 2. Then I asked them to think. Now, remember what standard practice they want them to engage in: reasoning and explaining and looking for and making use of structure. I asked them to think about the rate of change that they had calculated and whether or not it was the same as the slope that they calculated using the slope formula. And then I wanted them to think about why were they the same or why not. Some people did get a rate of change of 6 to 2, and then when they did the calculation, they did a rate of change of 3 to 1. I wanted them to think about whether or not those 2 things were the same, whether or not they were proportional. I wanted them to do what? Reason abstractly and quantitatively. And then I added a cognitively demanding high question in there. Remember, you wanted to have a range of cognitive demand. I gave them the number 5, and I said, now I want you to think about a real life scenario that demonstrates the relationship between these 2 points. Once again, we had already been discussing relationships in depthly because I was leading them. I am always trying my best to lead my students to functions and understanding proportional relationships, and that functions are relationships. So I through that cognitive demand, I want them to think about now, they found a rate of change, they found a slope, they saw that they were the same. What would this look like in real life? So I'm going to pause there for a second to look at any questions, to take on any thoughts that you all may have. Got any for me, Kate?
There was one about higher level problem solving skills, and is that really necessary for the GED?
Okay, so someone asked, are higher level problem solving skills necessary for the GED? Yes, but also keep in mind that not every state is using the GED. There are 3 different assessments out there, and all of them do want students to be able to reason and problem solve. It doesn't necessarily have to always be high content. I did mention that at the beginning. The content is not indicative of the task. You want to engage students in meaningful tasks no matter what level the content is, right? And you can always have multiple access points. Going back to the equation with the 4m minus 4m, 4m minus 4 is equal to 4m. If you had a student who does not know how to solve an equation, they could still reason through that. They could think about balance. They could think about, does it make sense if these 2 things are the same? There are multiple entry points to this. Same thing with this create a proportion table. Okay, so someone has asked, what is a T-table? That is an image that looks something like this. I'm going to attempt to draw it on the PowerPoint here. Let's see. Draw. It looks like this. Oh, nope, it didn't want me to do that on the PowerPoint. Try that again. Pen. I don't think I got it. A T-table looks like this. That's a T-table. We would do vertical T-tables. I would also engage them with horizontal T-tables. Some people call them function tables. Some people call them proportion tables. I call them T-tables because they look like a T. Okay, so they would put their points on the T-table. And as I mentioned, prior to this task, they had already engaged in a number of tasks about proportion tables and T-tables and things like that. If you want to know more about that at the end, you can definitely feel free to shoot me an email, and I can show you about the reason why I would take them through those proportion tables and how I went about doing that and scaffolding it for them so that something like this was not that challenging or difficult for them. And the T-table was something that I initially did not use. I had a student who taught me the value of it. I did not want to do it because I had an unproductive belief. I felt like everyone should be able to do it the other way, and that T-table is silly. It was an unproductive belief. And then I had a student who was struggling with doing the proportions, the way of the butterfly, with the cross multiplying, dividing. And finally I said, you know what, this isn't about me, this is about the student. And I showed the student the T-table, and the student immediately gravitated toward it. And the student was able to figure out, no matter what numbers I threw at him, whether it was directly proportional or indirectly proportional, the student was able to master this T-table. And that's when I realized I need to be able to provide multiple ways for my students to reason abstractly and quantitatively. So T-table now is like one of my favorite skills or things to teach my students how to use to help them visualize their understanding and relationships. Okay, I got another question here. Someone wants to know, should I use T-tables along with graphing or instead of plotting? I would say I use it in conjunction with, which once again, unfortunately, I don't have the time to get in depth with that and how it connects. But remember, I did say that my whole goal was always getting my students to understand the connection, the coherence to functions. And a T-table is a representation of a function. It is a representation of a function. Functions could be represented in 4 different ways, and a T-table or a chart is one of them. And the other way is a graph. So yes, you can definitely use T-tables along with graphing. I would not say instead of graphing, I would say with in conjunction to them. And that's another way that you can take that same worksheet. We've all seen that worksheet where we teach them on how to plot points, and then the worksheet has the little squares with the graphs, and we tell them to go practice plotting the points. And then the next worksheet is taking those points and making the line. There are lots of ways to engage the students in meaningful tasks if you're considering these standard practices, and that's what the tool was for today, to consider standard practice. What is it that I want my students to do in this task. So I want to make sure that's clear. That's what the standard practices are about. They're about what the students will be doing, what they will be engaging in, what experiences they will have when they are doing the task. I wanted the students for this task, I wanted them to reason abstractly and quantitatively, and I wanted them to look for, and then make use of that structure. The structure that they were looking for was when they were calculating the rate of change. And then making use of it was when they were thinking about whether or not the slope formula that they gave, how it connected to the rate of change that they had calculated. Because at this point, my students were already really in-depthly not indoctrinated with ratios and how their comparison of quantities and that rates are to special kinds of ratios. So looking for a rate of change was an easy jump for them. Nevertheless, I wanted them to look for and make use of that structure and then go forward. So when you're thinking about taking a worksheet and how you can modify it into a task, keep the practices in mind. What is it that I want the students to do in this particular instance? Okay, so I will go back to that one for you for a second if you want to see it one more time. But once again, you will have access to the PowerPoint, and this will be in there. These 8 standard practices, they're about what the students are going to be doing. Constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others, that one's my go-to. I love to hear people argue about math because you have to have a certain kind of knowledge to build an argument, whether that knowledge is correct or not. We know people can make arguments all the time and they're not correct, but still they're reasoning, they're putting things together to make that argument. So when you're thinking about making that shift from a worksheet, consider this first tool of these practices. What is it that I want the students to do? And start there. So in conclusion, because I want to make sure we have time for Burlington English as well as time to address any other questions, because my colleague here is writing questions down for me to answer, and I appreciate her help so much. There are 3 tools, as I did indicate, for how to make these shifts. And the first one we discussed today was the standard mathematical practices. Going forward, we'll talk about the instructional shifts and cognitive complexity. I slightly touched on cognitive complexity today, but these 3 things work cohesively together to engage students in meaningful tasks. These 3 things are things that I'm always keeping in mind when I take a worksheet, and believe me, I have a lot of them, as I'm sure we all do, and I say, you know what, I want to do better for my students. I want to give them a task because I understand what that task will do. It will help them stay in the seats. It will help build reasoning skills and problem-solving skills, and it will help them to understand mathematics and not just do it. And that is the fundamental root of a lot of people's anxiety when it comes to math. We're anxious about it because we don't get it. It was a series of disjointed skills that we either mastered if we were lucky or that we didn't. And therefore, I'm scared of it because I don't understand it. So I'm thinking about all of those things and I say, you know what, this worksheet, I need to change this into a task. I want them to have an understanding. I want them to stay in the seats. I want them to keep coming back and say, Ms. Bell, what are we going to do today? And I say, you have to wait and find out, right? So standard practices, instructional shifts, and cognitive complexity. We'll talk more about the instructional shifts, and we'll talk more about the cognitive complexity in the other sessions if you join us. And I'm going to answer this question now. Let's see, we have here resources with strategies available to help teachers, and how can we help teachers move from unproductive to productive beliefs? Okay, those are good questions. Okay, so resources that are out there, there are a lot of great resources that are available on the internet. Unfortunately, I don't actually have that file open with me right now. I generally give a lot of resources to my teachers, but one of my favorite resources as far as videos are concerned, because I'm a visual person, and I always want to see these things in action. I don't want to just hear about them. I don't want just theory. I want to see these things in action. One of my favorite resources off the top of my head is called teachingchannel.com or org. It's one of them. It's definitely Teaching Channel. You can just Google Teaching Channel. It's a great resource. I will give this disclaimer. It is K through 12. Okay. It's .org. Thank you very much, Kate. It's .org. It is K through 12. Nevertheless, it is a repository of videos of teachers in the classroom engaging in best practices of mathematics instruction. And one of my favorite videos to recommend on that is called Conjecturing About Functions. If you want to really see the standard practices in action in a meaningful task, this video is by far the best video on there. Conjecturing About Functions. Just search it. You'll see it'll come up. It'll even let you know when you're watching the video. It'll pause. It'll say, right there, that student was engaging in constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. I love the website. It's a great website. It's a great resource to use. Also, your colleagues are resources. And I know some of us are not that connected. I was a teacher who felt very isolated, and I got to connect, but you all are all in COABE. So you are already connected. So resources, as far as teachers, colleagues, we're great resources. You can email me. My email address will be at the end of the slide as well. And then last but not least, the other question I have is, how can we help teachers move from unproductive to productive leaves? Well, one of those is what we're talking about today. Moving from the worksheet to the meaningful task. Remember, the productive belief that I pointed out was the one that it's a productive belief to help students, to cause them to have to justify and make connections and reason and problem solve. The best way to do those things is by moving them into meaningful tasks. Another great tool, another great practice is class discussions. If you remember, in my classifying statements task, part of that task was a class discussion. I love to engage students in class discussions, as I know a lot of teachers do. I've heard some of the comments that were already on there of teachers saying that we talk to our students about these things and we have discussions. Class discussions are another great way to engage students in constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. So once again, they're still engaging in the standard practices. And I'm going to take two more questions because we don't want to run out of time. And I have another question here, is there a range of complexity you stay away from when asking students to create their proportions? No, there is not a range of complexity I ask students to stay away from. I am of the belief that if you help students to think of high-level cognitive complexity, then they will be successful with the lower-level complexity. It's a great metaphor that I've heard someone say, and I wish I was the one who created it, but I didn't, is the metaphor of chopping wood. Someone who really knows how to chop wood, what they do is they take the axe and they're not aiming for the piece of wood that they're trying to split. Typically, that piece of wood is on another big tree trunk that's been cut down. And someone who is experienced with chopping wood, they're not aiming at that piece of wood on top. They're actually aiming for the tree trunk below. And that's how they're able to get the axe all the way through, because they're aiming for the thing below it. They're not just aiming for the thing they're trying to hit. Inexperienced people, if you watch them try to chop wood, their axe gets stuck in the log quite often. It's because they're not aiming for something below it. They're aiming for the thing they're trying to hit. So if I know my students are only going to need complexity level 2 or complexity level 3, I'm aiming for complexity of level 4, because if they can do complexity level 4, then they can do 2 and 3. And last question. Actually, this isn't a question. All of the answers that Kate has been helping answer and anyone else has been contributing, those answers are actually available in the Q&A answered section. So if you're looking for any answers to your questions, those are available in the answers section. So last but not least, there are some things you can try. As you notice, class discussion is the first one here. For things, what I mean by things you can try, tasks, right? So if you're like me and I'm not actually a very creative person, sometimes I'm like, I got nothing. But here's some tasks that I currently use when I want to change a worksheet to a meaningful task. The class discussion, game, I love games. Group tasks, I love to make tasks where it's required for them to work in groups, or rotating partners where it's almost like speed dating, where you move from partner to partner so you get to hear what everyone is thinking, not just the person that you're sitting across from. I love fix someone's homework and puzzles, or create your own problems. So those are just a few that you could have to help get you started if you're stuck. And so once again, my name is Cynthia Bell. I'm a numeracy specialist here at the Literacy Assistance Center, which is a professional development agency based out of New York. That is my number there and my email address. If you wanted to send me any questions or comments or thoughts. And please remember that all the participants who have stayed and who participated, you will get a certificate via email tomorrow. So that's also good to have for your records. And I want to thank everyone for coming. I am going to give the reins back over to Sharon and Burlington English.
Thank you so much, Cynthia and Kate. We appreciate the webinar. You did a great job. I would just like to remind everybody that in addition to the certificate that you'll receive, you can also go to COABE's online repository and download the presentation and materials that have been uploaded there. And also, you're welcome to get on the COABE app, which is free, and talk about the webinar and share experiences there as well. I'd like to now turn this over to Robert Breitbard with Burlington English. They are a proud sponsor. They're the reason we're able to conduct these webinars. And Robert, can you take it from here, please?
Thank you, Sharon, and fantastic job, Cynthia. And to all those in attendance, congratulations to COABE and this great webinar we all just viewed. With over 20 years of my own experience in adult education as a teacher and administrator, I know just how powerful these webinars can be. Again, I'm Robert Breitbard, Director of Educational Partnerships at Burlington English. As you can see, Burlington English offers in one package a vast array of student learning experiences, all accompanied by amazing teacher resources for true blended learning, from academic and grammar highlighted programs to EL civics, life skills, and workplace readiness. What really takes classes to new heights with Burlington English are the more than 40 occupation-specific word lists that you see on the screen in career courses. These, along with digital books and exam prep, bring incredible value with a complete solution to educators and providers of adult education nationwide. In each of these webinars, I'll take just a couple of minutes to share a bit more about our programs. Today, we will focus just for a moment on our incredible, really incredible new WIOA specific course called Career Pathways. Of course, the thing on just about everyone's mind is all the changes coming to adult education, to our world with WIOA. Well, we at Burlington English have been working with all of the WIOA information coming out and educational professionals just like yourself across the country to develop comprehensive curricula that address much of these new requirements covered with our brand new, phenomenal, if I may say, Career Pathways courses. These dynamic courses engage learners like never before as they get a personal stake in their own learning through self-examination and career and post-secondary exploration. All of this as the students experience great classroom activities with the teachers and build their own personal digital portfolio, readying them to make an incredible transition to their next step. The Career Pathways courses that you see are appropriate for students at all levels and help teachers teach topics that may be new to them, like career clusters, job search, resume writing, and much, much more. The Career Pathways courses are an entirely free addition to the already incredible Burlington English Seed. Want to find out more? Definitely. I'm sure many of you are interested. Well, it's easy. Just go to www.burlingtonenglish.com/contact to hear more about how Burlington English can bring life-changing learning to your students. Again, thanks to everyone at COABE. Look forward to seeing you next time. Back to you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. We just would like to mention, and Cynthia is going to get on here real quick and mention that we have 2 more webinars coming up specifically about mathematics that she will be hosting. They're taking place, I believe, in September, and we're going to get that information for you in just a moment, but we will also send out emails as well, and we'll put it on our website. We also wanted to mention, in case you didn't see the chat box, that all of this information is going to also be uploaded to the online repository that you all will have access to. I see that we had nearly 300 participants, so I'd like to thank you all for attending, and if we're able to get the dates up here, just one moment, please. We're looking for the dates to be able to put up here for the next webinar.
Okay, Sharon, I do have the dates. The second part, which we'll talk about the second tool, that will take place on August 26th. And that event is going to be at 2 o'clock, August 26th. And then the next one, the third tool we'll discuss, is September 9th. And that event will take place at 3 o'clock. So we have August 26th and September 9th. Those will be the other two webinars where we'll discuss the other two tools of instructional shifts and cognitive complexity. Thanks, Sharon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cynthia. So everybody, thank you for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Take care. Bye now.